For most of our lives, we live by looking outward, looking at other people, looking at unresolved problems, looking at situations that don't reveal the way we hoped. We believe that if we can control them, if others change, if circumstances improve, then our minds will finally be at peace. But the more we look outward, the more tangled we become. The more we try to hold on, the more exhausted we feel. According to Carl Jung, suffering arises when we hand our inner state over to forces outside our control. Other people's thoughts, choices, or reactions are not within your reach. A relationship cannot be forced to operate according to personal desire. When we forget this, our energy is drained, our stability begins to wobble, and a slow sense of disconnection from the self takes shape. Letting go, therefore, is not turning your back on life. It is a reorientation of your gaze. It is knowing what you must take responsibility for and what must be set down. It is observing your own reactions instead of trying to control circumstances. From there, repeating emotional patterns begin to reveal themselves, no longer in a vague way. This video will show you how to let go of the people, problems, and situations you cannot control, so you can reclaim inner steadiness without losing yourself. If you're ready, comment, "Ready to let go," so we can begin exploring the journey back to you, starting from this very moment. Number 1. Suffering begins when you want to hold on to everything. Human suffering comes rarely from a single major catastrophe. It often begins quietly, from a very familiar thought. I have to keep everything okay. Keep the relationship from cracking. Keep the work from veering off course. Keep other people from changing. Keep life from moving beyond what I can predict. According to Carl Jung, the very moment you believe you must hold on to everything, you have stepped into the territory of suffering, not because life is too harsh, but because the ego is carrying a task that was never meant to be its burden. Jung saw the nature of the urge to control with striking clarity. He did not consider it strength, but a reaction born of fear. The ego, the conscious self, cannot tolerate uncertainty. It needs structure, it needs order. It needs the feeling that everything is still in my hands. So when it faces people or situations it cannot control, the ego does not loosen, it tightens. It thinks more, analyzes deeper, and interferes more. And the more it does that, the more it burns out. I once knew a friend named Michael. We met during a community project in California. Michael was responsible, always trying to do everything right. When he began to grow cold, he would not allow himself to maintain a relationship. He tried to talk more, explain more, fix himself more. He didn't call it control, he called it not wanting to lose. But the harder he tried to keep it, the more anxious he became, the more drained he felt. Not because the other person changed too much, but because Michael was trying to hold something that cannot be held by willpower. Carl Jung believed that moments like these, when you think you must control in order to be safe, often do not come from the present, but from unconscious forces. And he expressed it very clearly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When the fear of loss, the fear of abandonment, the fear of no longer being valuable has not been brought into awareness, it will drive your behavior. You think you are responding reasonably to the situation, but in truth, You are being pulled by an inner force you have not yet seen. What makes suffering so persistent is that the ego always believes that if it tries just a little more, everything will be okay. One more conversation, one more explanation, one more attempt to repair. But Jung understood that life does not operate by that logic. People change, feelings change, relationships have their own rhythm. When you try to freeze a current, you don't stop the current, you only get swept backward. You can imagine control like trying to hold water in your palm. When you cup your hand just enough, the water stays. When you clench, it spills through every gap between your fingers. The harder you try to keep it, the faster you lose it. But the ego does not accept this. It believes that opening your hand means failure. Jung saw it the other way around. He saw that opening your hand at the right time is not weakness. It is a psychological adaptation, necessary so that a person does not destroy themselves. Suffering begins when you assign yourself the responsibility of keeping everything from changing. When someone grows distant, you think you have to pull them back. When a situation becomes unclear, you think you must do something immediately. When life deviates from your plan, you panic. Jung called this an excessive identification with the ego. You are no longer living life. You are guarding it, as if one moment of inattention will cause everything to collapse. The problem is that the feeling of control initially gives you an illusion of power. You see yourself acting. You see yourself not giving up. But very quickly, that power turns into a burden. You become tense, sleepless, unable to stop thinking. And the most painful part is this: the outside world continues moving in its own way. Only you become more and more depleted. Jung did not advise people to turn away from life. He did not glorify indifference. What he emphasized was the boundary of personal power. You can take responsibility for your attitude, your choices, and your responses. But you cannot carry responsibility for other people's feelings, decisions, and changes. When you try to do that, you are unconsciously stepping out of the place of a human being and placing yourself into a role you cannot bear. Trying to control everything is like trying to control the weather. You can prepare a raincoat. You can choose when to go out. But if your goal is to make it stop raining, you will live in disappointment. Jung wanted people to mature enough to understand. True strength is not in controlling the world, but in the ability to remain steady when the world does not go your way. Real change does not come when everything outside becomes better. It comes when you accept that you have grown too tired from trying to hold everything in your hands. When you stop trying to fix, stop trying to pull, stop bracing yourself to make everything go as you wish, you begin to feel lighter. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you no longer force yourself to control what was never yours to control. Suffering does not vanish the moment you open your hand, but it begins to soften. Like a fist clenched for too long, finally willing to loosen. This part is not about letting go of one specific person or situation. It is about a very basic lesson. You do not need to hold on to everything in order to be safe. And when you understand that, you begin to let go, not because of loss, but because you no longer want to keep exhausting yourself. Number 2. Attachment is born from the fear of loss. When suffering is clearly seen as the result of trying to hold everything unchanged, attention naturally shifts inward. There, we begin to see that what keeps us stuck is not the situation or the person, but the quiet fear of loss that governs every attachment. People rarely cling because they love too much. Most of us cling because we're afraid to lose. Afraid of losing someone who once made us feel chosen. Afraid of losing a role that once made us feel valuable. Afraid of losing something familiar that we've held for too long, even if it no longer makes us feel alive. In Carl Jung's view, attachment is not weakness or a moral failure. It is the ego's self-protective reflex when it feels its own existence is under threat. When something becomes the place where you store your sense of safety, losing it is no longer simply a loss. It feels like losing yourself. The ego cannot endure emptiness. It needs an anchor to know who it is. So when the threat of loss appears, the ego does not loosen. It tightens. Not because it is strong, but because it doesn't know what else to do to protect itself. And in that very moment, attachment begins to form. The Bible describes this mechanism through a powerful image in the story of Lot's wife. When Sodom was destroyed, Lot's family was commanded to leave and not look back. But she turned her head, not out of curiosity, but because she could not leave behind what had once been her life. In that instant, she became a pillar of salt. In Jung's reading, this is not an external punishment, but a profound psychological symbol. When a person cannot leave the past because they fear losing it, they become rigid in their own inner life. Not because the world is cruel, but because the fear that clings makes them unable to move forward. That story repeats every day in modern life, only in different forms. It appears when a relationship has run out of vitality, but you don't dare leave. When a job has drained you, but you still hold on because you fear losing the identity attached to it. When a chapter of life has ended, but you keep living in memory because you fear that if you let go, you won't know who you are anymore. When attachment appears, the fear of loss leads the way. In Jungian psychology, this fear rarely originates in the present. It often comes from deeper layers, early experiences of being abandoned, replaced, or a long-held sense of not enough. When those experiences have not been made conscious, they do not disappear. They continue seeking reassurance through people, roles, and situations outside. You are not just clinging to a person. You are clinging to the silent promise that if that person stays, you won't have to face the old fear. Carl Jung expressed the link between fear and inner maturation with a very clear sentence. Where your fear is, there is your task. Where fear is, there is your task. The fear of loss is not an enemy to eliminate. It is a signal that somewhere inside you, there is a part not yet steady enough to stand alone. When fear is not faced directly, it operates in silence, turning into clinging, control, and emotional dependence. Attachment often dresses itself in very reasonable explanations: responsibility, sacrifice, too much investment to walk away. But Jung pointed out that many times those reasons are only a shell covering the fear of loss. And as long as that fear remains in the dark, people keep staying in situations that drain them, not because they love, but because they do not dare face the emptiness inside. You can imagine attachment like trying to hold your breath. At first you think you're in control, but the longer you hold it, the more rigid your body becomes. Eventually, it's not that the air disappears, it's that you can't endure it anymore. Relationships are the same. Life is the same. The more you try to hold on through fear, the more you suffocate inside the very thing you want to protect. Jung realized that the most suffering people are not necessarily those who have lost, but those who live in a constant state of about to lose. They keep watching, they stay guarded, they react intensely to the smallest changes, and that state is what drains vitality, leaving them unable to be fully present in the now. The practice here is not forcing yourself to let go immediately, but changing how you stay with the fear of loss. Each time attachment appears, pause and name the fear that is operating, without arguing with it, without acting too quickly. Seeing fear clearly is already a step towards separating from it. When you stop reacting from the fear of loss, you create space to choose. And it is that space that naturally loosens the grip of attachment. If this part touches you, share in the comments an experience where you once clung because you were afraid to lose, not so it can be fixed, but so you can hear more clearly what is happening inside you. Number 3. Other people often reflect what you have not yet faced. Right here, when attachment is recognized as the result of the fear of loss, a deeper layer begins to open. It is not only that you cling to a person or a situation, but it is also that you unconsciously look at others like a mirror, reflecting parts of yourself you are not yet ready to face. A great deal of pain in relationships does not begin with what others do, but with the intensity of your reaction to them. There are people who only need to show up to make you uncomfortable. There are tiny sentences that make your emotions flare. There are personality types that trigger you far beyond what the moment requires. According to Carl Jung, when a reaction exceeds the situation, it is rarely only about the present. It is a sign that something unconscious in you has been touched. Jung called this mechanism projection. What you have not acknowledged, not accepted, or not allowed to exist within yourself does not disappear. It seeks a way to appear outside through other people. And then you believe the problem is them, when in reality you are seeing a part of yourself only in a form you do not recognize. There was a comment left under a channel video that stayed with me for a long time. Someone shared that they were especially irritated by people who always act certain, speaking as if they're right. Every time they meet that type, they feel suffocated, want to avoid them, and even want to argue no matter what. But in the same comment, they also wrote that they were very afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of being judged, and often stayed silent even when they had an opinion. From a Jungian view, this is not a contradiction, it is a clear projection. The despondency they have not allowed themselves to live was pushed out of consciousness, then returned in the image of someone else, where it becomes irritating and hateful. Jung once said a very concise sentence, recorded in his works. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Jung did not say every negative emotion is projection, but he emphasized that when a reaction repeats, is too strong, or carries emotions disproportionate to the situation, it may touch a part of you that has not yet become conscious. When you look closer, you will see that projection does not only happen with what you dislike, it also happens with what you idealize. You may admire someone so intensely that you believe they possess something you can never reach. According to Jung, that too is a form of projection. You are seeing in their potentials, qualities, or strengths you have not dared to admit also exist in you. Because you are not ready to live with them, You place them outside, then stand at a distance and admire. Projection makes relationships heavy because you no longer meet others as they are. You meet them as a mirror for what you have not processed within yourself. This explains why you often encounter the same type of person, the same conflict, the same feeling of being wounded, even as contexts change. Jung did not call that bad luck. He saw it as the unconscious, placing the same lesson in front of you again and again, until you finally agree to look straight at it. If you need an image for this mechanism, imagine you are wearing glasses with scratches. Each time you look out, the world appears distorted, irritating. You might think the scenery is ugly, the light is harsh, or that other people are the reason you're upset. But the problem is the glasses. Projection is the same. It convinces you that the cause is other people, while the thing bending the picture is very close, right on the way to you. What matters is that Jung did not view projection as a mistake that must be erased. He saw it as a natural psychological mechanism. When a part of you has not been accepted, it needs a place to exist, and other people become that place. The problem begins only when you live your whole life without ever withdrawing those projections back to yourself. Then you give that enormous power over your inner state. This does not mean you must blame yourself or deny harmful behavior from others. Jung did not teach people to turn everything back onto themselves in an extreme way. He simply invited you to redirect attention. Instead of only asking why that person did that, notice which feeling in you was awakened, where that feeling is familiar from. How many times has it appeared in your life, in different forms? When you do this, you begin to stand in the position of conscious witness, instead of being dragged by reaction. Projection also explains why many relationships become tense when one person changes. When they no longer carry the image you once placed on them, you may feel disappointed or distracted. Not because they are wrong, but because the mirror no longer reflects what you once needed to see, and then you are forced to return to yourself. The lesson of this part is clear and practical. When someone triggers a strong reaction in you, instead of rushing to judge or defend, treat it as a sign. That person may be reflecting something you are not yet ready to see. When you have the courage to face it, others gradually lose emotional power over you. And right there, according to Carl Jung, the true process of inner maturation begins. Number 4. Letting go begins when you stop living for other people's gaze. The moment you realize your intense reactions are no longer someone else's problem, but signals from within, their gaze begins to lose its power over you. And from there, letting go moves to another level, no longer living to be approved, no longer defining yourself through the eyes of outsiders. Many people think they're living for themselves, but in truth, they are living for a version of themselves inside someone else's head. They choose words so they won't be misunderstood. They adjust emotions so no one feels uncomfortable. They try to appear stable, acceptable, and praiseworthy. And slowly, they forget what it feels like to live without needing to be seen. According to Carl Jung, this is not a personal weakness. It is the natural result of identifying with the persona, the social mask. The persona helps you survive in the community. It allows you to adapt, cooperate, and be recognized. Jung did not deny the persona's role, but he warns that when a person lives too long inside that mask, they lose contact with their true being. Jung wrote very clearly, Persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. The persona is a complex system of relations between individual consciousness and society. It is not the real you. It is the role you learn to fit in. When that role becomes identity, fatigue begins to accumulate. Living for other people's gaze keeps you in constant self-surveillance. You think before you speak, not because you are mature, but because you fear judgment. You do more than you can, not because you are passionate, but because you fear being seen as inadequate. You stay silent, not because you are peaceful, but because you fear losing your image. Over time, you can no longer tell what you truly want and what is merely a reflex to be accepted. And that confusion is what exhausts you. A very typical story can be seen in Jim Carrey. At the peak of his career, he was seen as a symbol of laughter, energy, and unstoppable humor. But after many years living under the public's gaze, Carrey fell into deep depression. In later interviews, he shared that there was a time he no longer knew who he was, when he wasn't making other people laugh. The beloved image became a cage. Only when he accepted letting go of the familiar role, allowing himself to be quieter, to create, and to live outside the spotlight, did he gradually find his sense of existing as a human being, not an image. From a Jungian perspective, this is the moment the persona is returned to its proper place. Modern neuroscience also helps explain why living for other people's gaze consumes so much energy. The human brain reacts strongly to social acceptance. When you're praised, the reward system releases dopamine, creating a pleasant feeling. When you're judged or excluded, brain regions linked to social pain are activated. This makes seeking approval become an addictive loop. But like every addiction, the price is dependence and the loss of inner freedom. Letting go at this level does not mean turning your back on the world or becoming careless. It means you stop letting external eyes decide internal worth. Jung believed that when a person lives too long through the persona, they lose connection with the self, the deeper center that does not need to prove, compare, or be constantly confirmed. And when the self is neglected, no matter how much approval you receive, the inside still feels empty. You can imagine it with a simple comparison. Living for other people's gaze is like constantly adjusting a sail based on cheers from the shore. When there's applause, you change course. When there's silence, you panic. Eventually, you no longer know where you're going. Letting go begins when you return to the inner compass, accepting that not everyone will like your direction, and that does not make you wrong. One of the biggest fears when you stop living for other people's gaze is the fear of being misunderstood. Jung faced this directly and suggested that psychological maturity is not being understood correctly by everyone, but being able to endure not being understood without betraying yourself. When you stop explaining to be approved, stop editing emotions to look good, you may lose some acceptance, but you gain inner consistency, something no compliment can replace. The subtle truth is that when you stop trying to impress, relationships often become more real. Not everyone stays, but those who stay do not love you for the image you present. They love you for who you are. Jung calls this a healthy rebalancing between persona and self. You can still play roles when needed, but you no longer live inside the role. On the practical level, what you need to do is simple. Withdraw the authority to judge your worth from the outside. Don't edit emotions to please. Don't add explanations to be understood. Don't keep doing beyond your capacity just to protect an image. Every time you pause before reacting out of fear of judgment, you've let go a little. And little by little, you return your energy to yourself, instead of scattering it outward to buy approval. Before continuing, take a quiet moment, slow your breath, feel your body here, without performing, without proving, without needing to be seen. Let yourself rest in this silence for a moment, like a necessary pause, before stepping forward on the journey of letting go. Number 5. Peace arrives when you withdraw energy from what is beyond your control. If in the previous part you could still see yourself being pulled into emotional reactions to people and circumstances, then here the focus is no longer on reactions, but on the invisible stream of energy quietly leaking away every day. Peace, in Jung's view, is not a state you force yourself to achieve. It is the natural consequence of no longer investing inner power into what was never within your range. People suffer not only because of events, but because they keep standing in the wrong place in life. There is a very common psychological habit that is rarely named. We live as if we must be responsible for the emotions, choices, and fate of the entire world around us. We worry what others think, how they'll react, and whether they understand us. We worry about the future that hasn't arrived, regret the past that has passed, and resent the present because it doesn't follow the script we wanted. All of these share one thing. They lie outside the direct control of consciousness. Yet paradoxically, we still pour a massive amount of energy into them, then wonder why we feel drained. Jung saw this confusion clearly when he studied the relationship between the ego and the unconscious. The ego is only a small part of the psychological life, yet it often behaves as if it is the control center for everything. When the ego tries to control flows larger than itself, the result is not order, but anxiety. Restlessness is not a sign that you care more. It is a sign that you are exceeding your natural limits. You can imagine this like trying to control the weather with your hands. You can shield yourself from rain, choose clothing that fits, but if you try to command the sky, you will only fall into helplessness. Much psychological suffering comes from not distinguishing between the weather and how I walk under the weather. When this boundary blurs, energy is constantly pulled outward, and inside there is only a tired emptiness. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This reminds us that peace does not come from fixing circumstances or controlling others, but from where we place our identity. When we let reactions, wounds, and what is beyond our reach define who we are, we keep being carried away. But when we realize we can withdraw energy from those battles, we begin to reclaim the right to govern our inner state. And in that pause, peace finally has space to appear. In everyday life, this happens quietly. Someone stays tense about another person's attitude, even though they cannot change it. Someone else lives worrying about scenarios that haven't happened. Others become obsessed with having to be right, to be recognized, to be understood. No grand tragedy, only slow erosion. Like a phone always running background apps, the battery drains fast, and the user doesn't know why. From a Jungian perspective, this is not a matter of weak will, but of psychological position. When the ego stands in the wrong place, it carries roles that are not its own. Controller, savior, guarantor of outcomes. But life does not operate by the ego's logic. It is wider, deeper, and holds laws that consciousness cannot command. When we accept this, the world does not necessarily change, but the inner tension lessens. To put it simply, psychological energy is like the water in a river. When you try to divert it everywhere, the flow weakens. When you let it run in its channel, it becomes strong and stable. Withdrawing energy from what is beyond your control is not shrinking. It is letting the current return to its rightful course. No more leakage, no more useless resistance. Jung believed inner maturity does not come from controlling better, but from discerning more clearly. Discerning what belongs to you and what belongs to life. When this discernment appears, people no longer feel they must tense against every fluctuation. They still feel, they still care, but they are no longer swallowed. Peace, then, is not a positive emotion. It is a state of not being torn apart from within. Notably, when energy returns to the right place, the outer world often feels easier to breathe in, even if reality hasn't changed much. Not because others suddenly behave better, but because you stop standing in the wrong role in their story. You stop trying to fix, predict, and control. And that withdrawal creates a quiet strength, steady, without needing to prove itself. The lesson and meaning of this part lies in something very simple. Peace does not come from gripping life tightly, but from knowing where to release. When you stop pouring energy into what isn't yours, the inner world naturally settles. Not because everything is okay, but because at last you are standing in the true position of a finite human being within a vast life. Number 6. Letting go is returning to inner strength. By now, after withdrawing reflection and withdrawing energy from what is beyond your reach, we touch the biggest misunderstanding of inner life. Letting go is often seen as weakness, as defeat, as loss. But in the depth of Jungian psychology, letting go is not losing strength. It is returning to where real strength actually lives. Not in control, not in resistance, but in the ability to stand steady without clutching. In the collective unconscious Jung studied, almost every myth revolves around a familiar motif. The hero becomes truly strong only after yielding in a very specific way. Not yielding to an enemy, but yielding to their own illusion. In Greek myth, Hercules, despite his extraordinary power, still has moments where he must kneel before tasks that cannot be solved by muscle. In Norse myth, Odin, the highest god, hangs himself on the world tree Yggdrasil, giving up external power in exchange for inner knowledge. Letting go in these stories is never an ending, it is always a gate. Jung did not see these stories as distant legends, but as psychological maps. He believes modern people are living the same journey, only the monsters now take the shape of the fear of losing control, the obsession with being right, being strong, and being recognized. We cling to images of ourselves, of others, of life, because we believe that if we release, we will collapse. But it is the clinging that drains the inner world. There is a very famous Jung quote, and here is the exact citation. "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." This is not pessimistic. It is an affirmation of inner strength. A tree can reach high only when its roots are deep enough. Letting go, in this sense, is not denying the shadow. It is stopping the fight against it. When you stop using energy to push it down, what was repressed no longer has to erupt in distorted ways. In everyday life, letting go is rarely loud. It doesn't look like a dramatic decision. it looks like the moment your hand grows tired. You realize you cannot keep holding an expectation, a role, or a relationship in the old way. Not because you are weak, but because you are awake enough to see the price. And right at that tired point, if you allow yourself to release, a different kind of strength appears. Not rigid, not performative, but enduring. Jung calls this the strength of an ego placed in its rightful position. When the ego no longer tries to dominate the whole psychological life, it becomes a flexible center, able to dialogue with the unconscious, instead of fighting it. Letting go, then, is not losing direction. It is shifting from driving in panic to allowing a deeper current of the soul to guide the way. Imagine you are swimming against a river. The more you struggle, the more you exhaust yourself. Letting go is not letting the water drown you. It is turning with the current, keeping your breath, and using strength where it matters. Outsiders may think you have given up, but inside, you are moving more intelligently. Many people fear letting go because they confuse not controlling with losing value. Jung saw the opposite. He believed a person's true value becomes visible when they no longer have to prove it. In the individuation process Jung described, letting go is a pivotal stage. It is when a person stops clinging to the mask, stops identifying with social roles, and stops forcing themselves to match an ideal image. Not to become passive, but to become real. And that real, paradoxically, always feels more stable than any strained version of right. Letting go also means accepting your own finitude. You cannot live for others, cannot outrun fate, cannot eliminate suffering entirely. When this truth is accepted, the inner world stops spending energy on invisible wars. Instead, energy gathers into deep presence, endurance, and clarity in action. It is a strength that isn't loud, but is hard to shake. Jung emphasized that real transformation does not come from adding more, but from removing what no longer fits. Letting go, therefore, is not a negative act. It is an act of purification. You do not become emptier, you become less noisy inside. And when the noise fades, the inner voice becomes clear. In the end, the deepest meaning of letting go is not in what you release, but in where you return. You return to the life unfolding within, no longer stretched by fear, no longer driven by the illusion of control. Letting go does not take your strength away. It returns to you the strength you already had, but that was hidden under the effort of trying too hard to become someone else. We've just walked through a journey that is not comfortable, but necessary. Not to escape life, but to see more clearly where you have placed too much energy. When that truth appears, letting go is no longer abandonment. It is an adjustment required to return to inner stability. Carl Jung did not teach us how to run from life. He showed us how to stand in the right place within life. When you stop trying to fix others, stop resisting what has happened, stop bracing yourself to control the future, you lose nothing. On the denial, you reclaim the energy that has been scattered for years. And that very energy becomes steadiness, clarity, and a kind of peace that does not depend on circumstances. Letting go does not make you weaker. It makes you stop living the wrong role. When you no longer stand where you do not belong, life naturally feels lighter. Not because the world changed, but because you changed how you are present in the world. If this video leaves any lingering echo, please hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe to continue accompanying content that goes deeper into Jungian psychology, helping you understand yourself and live more lightly each day.